Thanks for tuning in to leftcoastnews.net, news and information from the wacky, sometimes communist, liberal West Coast of the United States. For more, visit leftcoastnews.net. These bills I'm going to talk about today all have hearings tomorrow, February 14th. So there's still an opportunity for you to get on the Washington legislature's website at leg.wa.gov and look these bills up and leave comments, or at least leave your pro or con. And I strongly suggest that you take a few minutes to do that and make your voice heard. All right, we're going to start off with a doozy. This is Senate Bill 5462, which you probably haven't even heard about. This is an act relating to promoting inclusive learning standards and instructional materials in public schools. Can you guess what that's going to be about? The legislature recognizes that Washington state law prohibits discrimination in public schools for certain protected classes. The legislature also acknowledges that school districts are required to adopt a policy related to the selection or removal of instructional materials. Under state rule, the instructional materials policy of each school district must establish and use appropriate screening criteria to identify and eliminate bias pertaining to protected classes. Tell me something. Why is discrimination prohibited against certain protected classes? Why isn't it prohibited against everybody? Wouldn't that be inclusive? Wouldn't that be the ultimate inclusivity, to just protect everybody and not call out special people all the time? The legislature intends to expand these requirements by requiring school districts to adopt policies and procedures that incorporate selecting inclusive instructional materials that include the histories, contributions, and perspectives of historically marginalized and underrepresented groups. The legislature further recognizes that state law requires the state learning standards to be periodically updated to incorporate best practices in ethnic studies. The legislature intends to build on this duty by directing the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, in consultation with the Washington State LGBTQ Commission, to review and update relevant state learning standards to include the histories, contributions, and perspectives of LGBTQ people. The legislature believes that promoting inclusive learning standards and instructional materials will improve student achievement, attendance, parent and family engagement, and other dimensions that contribute to student success. The LGBTQ group of people is not an ethnic group. Why are you lumping in a sexual choice into an ethnic group of people? That is not ethnicity. That is a choice people make in their personal lives. The model policy and procedure must require that the school board of directors will adopt inclusive curricula and select inclusive, age-appropriate instructional materials that include the histories, contributions, and perspectives of historically marginalized and underrepresented groups, including but not limited to Native Americans and Native American tribes, people from various racial and ethnic backgrounds, including but not limited to African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders, women, people from various socioeconomic statuses, people from various religious backgrounds, immigrants and refugees, people with disabilities, people who are neurodiverse, people who are English learners or use sign language, and LGBTQ people as defined in RCW 43. By October 1st, 2025, school districts must amend the policies and procedures that are required under RCW 28A 320230 to incorporate all the elements described in the section. For the purposes of this section, inclusive means curricula and instructional materials that create and sustain a sense of respect, belonging, safety, and attention to individual needs and backgrounds that ensure the full access to engagement and participation in available activities and opportunities. Quite frankly, this is unnecessary because at schools, all kids are included. There may be a teacher here or there doing something on their own that they shouldn't be, just like any job classification where you have some bad apples. But 99.99% of schools and teachers already are inclusive to all these kids. Now, I have no problem with teaching history and perspectives and stories about these ethnic groups, people that make up the American people, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, women, socioeconomic status, religious backgrounds, immigrants and refugees, disabilities, neurodiverse. I mean, these aren't ethnicities, though. Some of them are. Some of them aren't. But as far as it goes about talking about people's sexual preferences, that is your own business. That doesn't belong in school. I don't know how many times we have to talk about this. We don't need to be stuffing this crap down our kids' throats. But that is exactly what the legislature wants to do, and they want to order the schools to do it. This bill goes on to order school boards and board of directors and the superintendent to report annually to the superintendent of public instruction the following for each employee group listed in the subsection, which is classified staff, certified personnel, administrative staff, and for all programs constituting a part of such district's curriculum, that they will have an evaluation of criteria and rubrics, a description of each rating, and a number of staff in each rating. Determine the final assignment of staff certified or classified according to board enumerated classroom and program needs and data based upon a plan to ensure that the assignment policy supports the learning needs of all the students in the district and gives specific attention to high-need schools and classrooms. And of course, to adopt the curricula consistent with law that they talked about in Section 2 of this bill, which I just read. And it goes on to say evaluating teaching materials, textbooks, teaching aids, handouts, or other printed material in public hearing upon complaint by parents, guardians, or custodians of students who consider dissemination of such material to students objectionable. Oh, so they're going to listen? Somehow I doubt it, because they're going to continue to put this in no matter what. This is required by law. So even though it says that every board of directors, unless otherwise specifically provided by law, shall prepare, negotiate, set forth in writing, and adopt policy relative to the selection or deletion of instructional materials, such policy shall state the school district's goals and principles relative to instructional materials, include all the elements of the model policy and procedure described in Section 2, which I read. They have a clause here that they've deleted a bunch out of, which is about establishing an instructional materials committee to be appointed with the approval of the school board by the school district's chief administration officer. Guess what they deleted out of that? The committee may include parents at the school board's discretion, provided that parent members shall make up less than 1/2 of the total membership of the committee. Provide for reasonable notice to parents of the opportunity to serve on the committee and for terms of office for members of the Instructional Materials Committee. That has been removed. Now they have to provide a system for receiving, considering, and acting upon written complaints regarding instructional materials used by the school district. Okay. Yeah, they'll take your complaint and they won't do anything with it. Goes on to say that local school district's board of directors must determine that the Instructional Materials Committee that they have currently now made recommendations in accordance with district policy adopted under subsection 1 of this section before approving the recommendation. Which means if you don't approve of the LGBTQ instructional material, it won't matter because that's part of the law and will be required to be there. So you won't be able to remove that. Charter schools will also be subject to these rules. So if you thought you were going to put your kid into basically a private school to get out of this, wrong. This goes on to say that each ESD must designate a regional inclusive curricula coordinator, and their duties are helping school districts implement these rules, model policy and procedure on inclusive curricula, and ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion are interwoven throughout curricula and not treated as standalone topics, facilitating school district use of bias screening tool to review instructional materials, serving as a resource to instructional materials committees established by school districts within the ESD, supporting professional development efforts regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, including required professional learning days, and helping school districts improve school and classroom culture and climate using inclusive instructional materials. Each ESD must also establish a regional youth advisory council for inclusive curricula and equity, including inclusive advisory council. The purpose of the inclusive advisory councils is to advise and inform the work of school districts to the OSPI. Each advisory council is required to distribute an annual survey to students to assess student access to inclusive instructional materials and coordinate with the Legislative Youth Advisory Council, the Washington State Leadership Board, student representatives on school boards, and any other relevant student or youth councils or groups that include student representation. Each inclusive advisory council must consist of at least one student representative from each school district within the ESD, and students may be selected to serve on an inclusive advisory council by staff recommendation, application, or interview. The inclusive advisory councils must consist of students with diverse backgrounds, which means not white people, including backgrounds that include diversity as it relates to sex, race, religion, national origin, connection with the military, sexual orientation, gender expression or identity, disability, socioeconomic status, and involvement in the community. Please, this is not what school is for. School is to learn English, math, history, reading. That's what school is for. It's not for all this other trash that we have put into schools. These kids are going to be so unprepared for the real world when they leave school, because this is not what is important or how the real world functions when you get a job. And not only that, this is going to put a whole nother layer or two or three on schools that will have state control in one form or another, telling your school districts what instructional material they are going to give to your kids. Instead of the school boards of these areas, of whatever area you live in, deciding what's best for the kids who live in what area you're in and whatever your community believes, the state is going to decide. These boards are going to decide. These people and their sexual orientation are going to decide. Sexual orientation is not ethnicity. Ethnicity is one thing. That should be taught. All those things should be taught. But your sexual orientation does not belong in school. Your gender expression or identity does not belong in school. This is a terrible bill, and it needs to be shot down. So please go to the legislature's website and leave your at least your opinion, or leave some statements. You can still sign up to testify, or even just leave your testimony in an email form, but please take the time to do it. This is wrong. Our kids should not be subjected to this. There's already enough of this going on in Seattle, in Olympia, and other big cities in the state. Small towns don't need to be subjected to this garbage. The state needs to stay out of our schools as much as possible.